There we go. Welcome,
Okay.
everybody. Thank goodness. We were talking about transitions earlier, and really, I haven't fully transitioned to this new year. I want to welcome you all to this table talk discussing the ways in which we can reimagine a year of firsts. Table Talk is Reimagine's ongoing series created by and for underrepresented communities. My name is Andrew Engel, and I lead virtual programming for Reimagine, and I'm here to support the vision of Dr. Chinasa Elue and Dr. Julie Shaw, who I'll be introducing in just a bit. My pronouns are he, him. For folks who may not be able to see me or can't access video, I'm a white cisgender male, got my glasses, salt and pepper hair, my pink flannel shirt because it's a little chilly still here in New York. And I've got a bright orange wall in my background. Reimagine is a nonprofit organization catalyzing a uniquely powerful community. People of different backgrounds, different ages, races, and faiths, people of no faith, all coming together in the hopes of healing ourselves and the world. We specifically support each other in facing adversity, loss, and mortality, and in transforming life's biggest challenges into meaningful action and growth. Everyone here is welcome, but I'd like to underscore that this is a dedicated container to center the feelings and voices of BIPOC folks. For those of you who don't identify as people of color, we welcome you and encourage you to bear witness, listen, and learn in allyship. The majority of us are here from the United States, also known as Turtle Island by Native Americans and their allies. I am in Lenapehoking, where a large city called New York is located on unceded land. Wherever you are, I ask you to join me in acknowledging Indigenous communities in North America, their elders, both past and present, as well as future generations. I'm stating this because it's a step towards continuing to dismantle the ongoing legacies of settler colonialism and white supremacy. Land acknowledgements are important gestures, and we need to do more to realize a more liberated, equitable, and inclusive society. So we're interested in knowing where all of you are located. If you haven't done so already, please put that in the chat. And there's a very helpful map. I'll be pasting a link in a bit. It's called native-land.ca, where you can check out the lands of Indigenous people on this wonderful map. And for those who wish, click on the CC icon to get a live transcript of what's being said. And you can save the chat by clicking on the three dots in the chat box. And feel free to send me a private note in the chat if you have any technical issues. I might be able to help you. I just want to announce a few upcoming events. We have one that may be of interest to Asian Americans' friends, colleagues, and family in need of grief support during Lunar New Year. On January 25th, the team at MISO will help you reckon with losses that are associated with family heritage and culture. Tita Beatty and Soyeon Davis are cultural bereavement educators, peer grief support facilitators, and end-of-life doulas. So check that out. And also, our next vigil on February 7th features Rick Hansen, author, psychologist, and founder of the Global Compassion Coalition, and Patty Montoya, a Reimagine community collaborator and founder of Titiposa, a space created to help people across their grief and trauma, to process their grief and trauma and grow from their experiences. Patty will be leading the honor ceremony. Okay. And now I'd like to say a few words about the dynamic duo that put this event together. Dr. Chinasa Elue is a grief coach and end-of-life doula whose own journey through a toxic work environment and personal loss led her to become an advocate for grief-informed workplaces. She was a guest speaker in Pain to Purpose, last summer's series on career and life design at Reimagine, and she recently spoke beautifully, I might add, at our vigil earlier this month. She's a professor at Chinasa State University in Georgia and a consultant to organizations moving forward to make impactful changes in the midst of uncertainty with empathy and care. She's also the host of the Grieving in Color podcast. Dr. Julie Shaw is an educator, grief wellness advocate, an experienced griever. She's the founder of the Hello, I'm Grieving support community. Julie is the co-founder of Lead Different Consulting, where she works with global leaders in diverse industries and facilitates sessions on leadership development, DEI, and grief education. She also hosts the Hello, I'm Grieving podcast. In December of 2022, Julie co-hosted a Reimagine winter holiday gathering to celebrate the gifts and treasures we've received from our loved ones who have passed, and that is in our video library. So check that out. And now I'm going to hand it off to Dr. Julie and Dr. Chinasa.
Awesome. Thank you, Andy, so much for that wonderful introduction. And thank you so much for this opportunity to really share with you all our heart as we talk about how to reimagine the year of first. I'm excited to co-facilitate this with my wonderful co-presenter, Dr. Julie Shaw. We wanted to, before we started off today, to give everyone a chance to enter into a moment of silence. We wanted to invite you into this space, first to take some time to honor who or what was lost, to honor what or who you are currently grieving right now in this particular moment in time, and to honor how you're showing up in this space as you're navigating the ins and outs of grief. So we'll just pause first and enter into a moment of silence. Thank you so much. So we want to thank you all for taking the time out to be with us here this afternoon. We know as we were thinking about this topic, we were really interested in talking about something that oftentimes is not stated clearly when we think about what it means to navigate grief and loss in our respective grieving journeys. And so we wanted to talk to you a little bit about the way that we situated this topic to really share with you all the importance of why we must acknowledge the year first as we move forward. And so when we reference the year first, and this may be your first time hearing us phrase it like this, but perhaps once we give you a detailed explanation today, you'll understand exactly what we mean. We're referencing the year after you have lost a loved one, and you're walking through those unique milestones, the birthdays, the anniversaries, the death anniversary, that really present itself with a unique opportunity for how perhaps you might navigate your emotions, and your physical reactions to navigating these days without that loved one being present with you. This is relevant. This topic in itself is relevant to all people. We all walk through seasons when we encounter loss, where we now have to begin to reimagine what it means to exist in a world where our loved ones are no longer present with us. And so we wanted to, in this moment, make sure that we explain that to you all clearly, and then also just offer some expectations as we enter into this space today. We know that if this is your first year walking through your first lost, perhaps you maybe lost someone over the past calendar year, and you are now here and you've crossed over into 2024, and you're navigating the myriad of emotions that are present. Or maybe this is your 10th anniversary of experiencing the loss of your loved one, and you recognize that these first are still happening, right? We know that grief, honestly, is forever. It never stops because our love is eternal. And so we want to set some expectations today as we enter into this space so that we can make sure that this is a safe and supportive environment for all people. We want to encourage you, first of all, to not practice judgment in this space, right? We do not judge, and we're not here to give advice. We're just here to offer insights from our own lived experiences and how we've been able to support others in our professional and personal capacities as they've navigated their own loss. We want to simply honestly provide a space to bear witness to what we've seen as we've talked about this in various settings, and to create a space that may be helpful or useful for others here in this room to be able to share and process how they're navigating their emotions and their thoughts and feelings around loss. And so, as we kick off our time together today, we want to start off with sharing our stories because if we're going to serve you in this capacity, it's only important that we let you know who we are and how we have entered into this space where grief has been very near and dear to us in a variety of different ways. And so, I'll first kick off by sharing my grief story by letting you know that I encountered grief intimately on May 25th, 2019. That was the year that I lost my mother to cancer after her brief battle of 11 months. And as my voice is cracking, it's still very salient for me because this year will be her fifth year since she's no longer been with us. But in a variety of ways, it feels just like yesterday. And so I remember losing my mom, and it was months after I had my second child. And I began this very, very difficult process of trying to even conceptualize what does the world look like in my life without someone who has been with me since my conception. And so I remember when my mom first passed away, one of the first encounters we had was celebrating my sister's milestone birthday. She was turning 30. And you know that when you hit these big milestone birthdays, it's a time of celebration. And my mom was someone who always brought the balloons and the cake. She was everything in between. She was a whole celebration. And that first milestone birthday, we knew that we needed to rally around my sister to support her because that would be a very, very challenging time to embrace entering into that new age, but also realizing that the very champion of my mother, who she was to all of us, was no longer going to be there to support her. And I recognize that as we transition on and the months went on, we hit her birthday. She would have been 55 that year. And I remember thinking to myself, man, I'll never get another birthday celebration with her. My birthday's a week after hers. And so my birthday rolled around. And as I prepared for my first birthday celebration without my mom, I remember just asking myself, like, how will I even begin to encounter celebrating or lighting candles, knowing that my heart was so sad? And when the holidays rolled around the corner and we embraced Thanksgiving, and then my siblings and I got together after Thanksgiving because, quite frankly, it was a disaster. We were in deep, deep mourning. We were lamenting the magnitude of who my mother was to us. And me being the oldest of four siblings, I got a unique idea and I said to them, hey guys, let's think about something we can do over the Christmas holiday because we knew that in that moment that the way that we had approached Thanksgiving, we weren't prepared. We did not have a plan. It kind of caught us unaware, and it was hard. And so we chose to do something outside of our norm, and we traveled to a place with a beach. It was cold, but we still went anyways, right? And so we traveled, and we were together in community. And I'll never forget being in the kitchen with my sister and my brothers, and we were trying to recreate my mother's dressing recipe. I call her master chef in my book, right? But we were recreating this recipe, and I could not remember some of the key ingredients. Like it just blanked on me, and I just burst into tears. And I was like, I will never be able to ask her this recipe again. And so it's the realization that as you walk through these milestone moments, or you have a celebration, you want to quickly pick up that phone call, that phone to dial that familiar number, that person is no longer dear. And you have to readjust your mind to the fact that they are not in this realm anymore. And it is a challenge. And as we crossed over into, for me, it was 2019 into 2020, I'll never forget I was with we were at a watch night service and we were counting down, and as the countdown hit 3, 2, 1, I literally bust into tears as streamers were falling from the sky. And I felt like I left her behind in the previous year. And so as we're here in January and you all have crossed over in a variety of different ways into this new year, there oftentimes is a moment where we engage in some deep reflection and ask ourselves, what does this year hold for us? And I knew in that particular moment in time that the year was going to hold a lot of grief, a lot of readjustment, a lot of pain, to be honest with you. But I also knew that it was an opportunity for it to hold a place for me to grow and a place for me to not avoid the pain that was there, but to lean into all of the lessons that were present, even in that moment, and to figure out how I was going to honor my mother beyond that time. And so I want to pause there because my year of first continues to evolve. There have been many firsts since that first initial year. We entered into last year. My sister, eventually she got married, and that was year 4 for us, but that was the first as well. So there are always milestone moments, milestone celebrations that you will encounter that will hit you at a variety of different ways. And we want to chat today about how do you navigate that when those moments come and that loved one that you desperately want to talk to is not available, but you feel their presence with you each and every day. So I'll pause and Julie, take us away.
Thank you. Thank you. And I think this is what today's about. And I know that you aren't able to come off mute today, but please utilize the chat box. We'll be walking you through some other exercises too, so that you all have the ability to share your story as well. I think both of us believe that when you share your story, it allows other people to share theirs. And I'm sure as many of you were sitting back and listening to Dr. Elue is understanding, yeah, I've felt that too. This resonates. I'm thinking about my first coming up, and there can be similar shared experiences that we have, even though these are our own experiences that we're sharing with you today. And I think that's how we find connection through grief. I'm a believer that grief is one of the best and biggest connectors that we have for us to connect in the most authentic ways, because it allows us to kind of just be vulnerable and open up. And when we find that person, and y'all can let me know in the chat, when you find that person that has experienced this, you already know how to speak the language. And I think that's something that I have absolutely enjoyed in meeting Dr. Elue when I first saw her speak on a panel here with Reimagine and had to reach out to her. So being able to make those connections, which we hope that you're making those connections as well, is really great. And so going into my story, and there were so many things running through my head. What can I share? And oh, there's this, and I wanted to say that. But mine started in 2020 when my sister died, and she experienced a long death with lupus. And so navigating all of that was a lesson in itself. And when she died, it broke me open in so many different ways that I never knew existed. And I think that's something else that I've been learning about my own grief, is that it has allowed me to experience all the emotions that I feel like the universe has to offer. And being able to feel those emotions so differently, especially when these moments of first arrive, that there's this new discovery, there's this new unfolding that happens. And so my sister was slash is my person, and was the glue and unifier of our family. And I think maybe that's something else maybe some of you may be experiencing, is who do I become now? When that person, that role is gone, now it's a first for me to be the glue. And it's the first for me to be the person that is organizing things and helping the family communicate. That first can even look like that. And something that I've been experiencing currently right now in this moment that I've been fully aware of and been navigating that. So I think this reimagining the year first is on time for me, that I wasn't really expecting to hit like this, is that I will be 44 this year. And that was the same age that my sister was when she died. And so with my birthday passing and experiencing, and some of us may do what's called grief math, where we start looking at these numbers, and whether we're tallying, it's our first year, it's our second year, it's our third year, what do these numbers mean to us? And so that number 44 is now having a much different meaning to me. And as Dr. Elue was talking about, as the year turns over, what are we transitioning into? What are we stepping into? That now I'm stepping into a world where I will now exceed the age of my sister, who was my big sister. So now, am I the older sister? What does that look like? So navigating all of that and how we reimagine how we step into these years of first can be very challenging. And I also want to acknowledge those challenges. And maybe it could be challenging because sometimes grief isn't always love. And I always want to point that out because it's so dynamic, that how do we understand navigating these first when maybe it was a challenging relationship that we had as well? And those things can be very confusing. So we want to welcome all of that in today. I'll be brief. There's more to my grief story. I navigated infertility and still understanding how that shows up in my life, and being able to own that grief as well. But I want to give time to everyone here, and we'll be able to share our story as we continue through today. So please engage in the chat box as you feel comfortable. And this can, maybe that's a first for you today. So as we move on, what I do want to acknowledge is, as we have centered this around the experience of BIPOC folks, it was also very important for Dr. Elue and I to really understand how this applies to everyone here today. That we do want to invite everybody into this conversation. And for me, especially having a DEI background, I like to understand identity. And so when we look at identity, I wanted to do a quick activity with you to engage everybody here today. So get ready to go to the chat box. But when we talk about identity, I like to center it around here because our identity intersects with our grief. We talk about intersectionality a lot of in the inclusion world, on how me identifying as a Black woman with her doctorate degree from an immigrant mother, that's openly gay, like all these different things that intersect affect how I show up in the world. And now when you add grief onto this, how it intersects with our grief in how we identify can also have an impact on how we are experiencing these firsts and how we are then reimagining these firsts. And so what I want you to do right now is I want you to simply put in the chat box maybe 3 things about your identity. So kind of how I listed there. They could be hobbies that you enjoyed doing. It could be something about your culture. It could be something about where you sit in your family. So go ahead and put that into the chat box right now. You can list 3 things as you feel comfortable, and share those different identity markers in the chat box. And let's see. And this gets us to kind of know who's here today and who is in the audience. And I see these messages popping in. Thank you, everybody, for putting that into the chat box. Great. I'm glad that resonated with you. Perfect. Okay, so we have traveler, helper, nature lover, Jewish, Nigerian American, sister, friend. Thank you for putting that in there. I see them coming through. White, cisgender, death worker. Thank you. I love this. Oldest of 3 witchy sisters. So thank you for putting that in there, Kamali. And hopefully I'm pronouncing your name correctly. So yes, so you can see how when we're looking at all these dynamic, and this is just the tipping point of who you are. We're all such diverse people, which makes us amazing. And there's so much power in that. And so now when you take this and you add grief into that, what does that look like for you now, right? How do I show up? And I see Barbara's putting in here as a single mom. How does my grief intersect as being a single mom? How is that going to impact the first that we're going to be navigating and reimagining? How does this impact even being a birth worker, right? Understanding that there can be grief even in these birth spaces, even understanding the journey to get there and even after. I think sometimes as we talk about death, I think I am now a new mom as well, but understanding there's grief even in the good times. There's grief even in those transitions of becoming a new mom and understanding your new identity. So I just wanted to give you all that space to, one, be proud about who you are and to put that in there and be vulnerable. And then also take that moment to understand, how is my grief intersecting with who I am and my identity, and what brings us all here, and what makes our grief all so very different, and different is okay. Dr. Elue, I want to check that over, and how this might be confusing at times when we're thinking, yes, like maybe that's what it is. That's what's been impacting this and how I show up and how people may receive me in my communities. Again, I'm looking at all these dynamic people in the chat box right now. So I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Elue, and let's get into an activity that I think is going to be amazing that she's about to do with all of you.
Yes, thank you so much for that, Dr. Shaw. And, as you were talking, I would be remiss to say that, as we were sharing our group stories, I began to think about even how when my mom passed away, it was 9 months before the pandemic, 9 months before the death of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and a host of different protests that were occurring during that time. And so I think I would be remiss to not mention in this particular moment that for BIPOC folks in particular, when we think about navigating grief, not only are we navigating the grief and loss of our our loved ones or those who have passed on, we're also navigating that on top of the ways that we're seeing systemic issues run rampant in society, right? And that complicates and troubles how we're able to grieve or how complex our grief then becomes because we're now navigating the grief of what we're seeing on a day-to-day basis. And so you might be here in this particular moment in time and be thinking about your upcoming first for this year. And so we want to pivot a little bit to talk about how to perhaps prepare for that opportunity. Again, we're 4 years, I'm heading into the 5th year as we speak, right? And I'm thinking about how so much has changed over time. And we're here in 2024, and we're hearing all of the different narratives that may be impacting us in a variety of different ways. And if you're from a historically underrepresented or marginalized group, you know what it means to be here in 2024 and be navigating this space, particularly as a BIPOC person, and then also thinking about your grief. And so we want to ask you today, we have a Padlet link I'm going to drop in the chat for you really quickly. What are you thinking about as you prepare for your upcoming first? Perhaps as, for a variety of different ways. You might find that your grief is intersecting with particular events or things that are coming up. And so we want to give you an opportunity now to access that Padlet link and share with us, what are you thinking about as you prepare for your upcoming year first? And so, Andy, if you could put that Padlet up for us and we can see as the comments are being populated in here, how others might be conceptualizing or thinking about their upcoming first. So we're
Yes.
I think I could be able to do it too
okay,
if you
cool.
want me to. Do you want me to do
Oh,
that, Andy? I can
absolutely.
share it.
That's fine.
I got it.
Oh, you got it? Okay, perfect. Awesome.
Okay.
Just gotta push me a little.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
And I love that it's completely anonymous.
Yes.
So it's anonymous there. You can click on the link and it'll pop up in another screen on your device. And then you'll be able to click the little purple plus sign in the lower right hand corner and then add your comment there. And we'll start to begin to see people populating. I see the little thing thinking up
Yes.
there. So it looks like folks are okay, there we go. I see some
Yes.
popping up.
So we see some of your comments coming in, and some of them are around thinking about how to honor and celebrate a birthday. Um, Others thinking about more rest, how to incorporate more rest into this first year. How you're going to celebrate yourself more this year. Yeah.
That's a
Yeah,
good one.
that's a really good one. Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's interesting, grief has a unique way of bringing those things that are really important to the forefront, right? It's very easy at times to get bogged down by the day to day and just grinding all the time. But there's always a unique opportunity in thinking about what this might look like. Andy, I'm not sure if you're writing yours or not, but we see
Yeah.
it.
Oh,
Yeah.
You're sharing your screen, but I see you taking things slow. Absolutely.
Mm.
and
Uh,
Chinasa, I just want to mention too, I didn't quite get this at first. Maybe you mentioned this already and I wasn't
Mhm.
listening, but if you click the plus sign, that's the way to populate
got it.
this.
Yes, correct.
Perfect.
Thank you.
I'm seeing this question here. Will I be in a good place to really truly celebrate my mother?
Mm,
And I want to comment on this one
yeah.
because sometimes I think as we're talking about even more rest or taking things slow, and I think even as Dr. Elue was talking about in the beginning, this judgment is sometimes we may judge ourselves too much, or we might want to push ourselves too much, or see what other people are doing. And sometimes maybe you aren't in that place yet. And that's yet. I always like to add that at the end of the sentence, right? Is that do what feels good for you. There is no pressure to grieve a certain way. That how you are grieving is perfectly fine, right? I always do that with a caveat, as long as you're not harming yourself or others,
Yeah.
to put that in there, is that those are those anxious thoughts that we may have, and find what works for you. Even if celebrating your mother is okay, I can finally put a picture up of her. And
Mm,
then, because that might be hard for some people,
yeah.
or, I can finally talk to her out loud, whatever it might be, is give yourself that grace to really examine that and listen to your grief there.
Yeah, I love that, Dr. Shaw. I mean, yeah, there's always at times there can be that realm of self-judgment that's present there when we're thinking about, oh, I'm not doing enough, or mommy would have wanted me to do this particular thing, right? But sometimes it's just okay to just simply be and not put those expectations on ourselves because, like you mentioned, we may not be in a place to even truly celebrate as needed. So
Mhm.
definitely resonate with those comments as well.
Yeah.
Mm,
I'm looking at some more here. Thank you
yeah,
everybody for posting these on
yes.
there. Ah, I see this one, how to navigate the fog. This grief fog or grief brain, as it's commonly referred to, is actually a real biological thing that is taking place in your brain. Your neurotransmitters are the ones that are supposed to be sending messages to your brain and other parts of your body so that we function, that we do things. But those synapses and neurotransmitters have been affected by your grief. In essence, your brain is trying to rewire itself to understand what's going on, because this person that has been in your world and has existed is no longer physically here. So your brain is still trying to make these connections. And so that's kind of a little bit quick, very fundamental level of how grief brain develops. And this how to be joyful despite being so heartbroken. Whenever I see these two things together, it's kind of that whole intersection thing too that happens, is that both can coexist. Okay,
Yeah.
so for those of you that need to hear that, both can coexist, that grief is not binary. It does not have to be one or the other. It's that, and that's what makes it confusing, is that you can have these joyful moments and still be heartbroken. Try
Yeah.
to allow yourself to feel that. Um, and that this is the bittersweetness of grief
Mhm.
that will happen along the way.
That was so good. That was so good, Dr. Shaw.
Thank you.
As we're reading through these, one that is speaking to me right now in this particular moment is this one that says, how I can honor my loved one and being able to go through the grief because of busy schedules. I try to suppress any feelings of grief.
Mm,
And I think that hits home on a variety of different levels because in a lot of ways, when we lose our loved ones, um, our immediate kind of protective mechanism is to go back to a business as normal approach and try to just get back into some form of routine, which in some ways can be great and helpful. But in a lot of ways, we do need to honor the fact that it's not business as normal and that we can pause and take a step back and allow ourselves the opportunity to really feel deeply. One thing that I had to remind myself was about this binary around time, right? People think that after 6 months or a year, you should have moved on, you should be happy and back to normal, right? But I was like, I am not normal. I will never be the same again, right? That the person who I was before May 25th, 2019 no longer exists, right? I am a new iteration of myself because I loved my mother so deeply. And in that moment, I had to give myself the grace to grieve her just as deeply, right? And I think oftentimes because we're in this fast-paced society, we feel this need to kind of usher back into the fray of things, getting back to the normal schedule and the hustle and flow. But perhaps, if we were to think about how grief might be an invitation to slow things down and to be really reflective and intentional about thinking, how might I perhaps exist in this moment in time as the ways in which that I have wanted to honor my loved one has been truncated because I've been so busy. How can I pause and give myself the time I need to really embrace these emotions and the feelings, to really just pay homage to the person or the people that you might be grieving in this moment in time?
thank you. I was like, give me all, all of that. Um, and totally resonate with that. Because even that time mechanism, right, is I've often said, people will have different euphemisms that they say, like time will heal. I've always come back to people and said, um, it's not time that heals, it's what you do with that time that does. And how are we, like what you all are putting here in the chat, how am I thinking about, how do I have this new iteration, of myself? How do I embrace this change? And granted, it is not easy. I will tell you, it is not easy, but are we intentional with our time? How are we able to open ourselves to other opportunities and other things? Like I'm seeing here, how can I let go of the future? Where it may be, how can I, and I'm using this pun intended, how can I reimagine the future? What does that look like now for me? Because the future will still be there. Now it's different. And that's really hard for us in that acceptance piece of grief is how can I reimagine? How can I think about what else? And how can I look at this differently? Which again, it takes that time, but again, what we do with that time and how we invest our time, because our time is our most precious commodity.
Yes. I'll hit home on one more that is just speaking to me in a variety of different ways. It says finding spaces where I can be myself and not hide my grief. And I'll couple that with the other one that says permission for feeling, including rage.
Mm.
Those all of these are really just so captivating and just so heartfelt in a variety of different ways. But I wanted to hit home in particularly about just being ourselves because we, in this context, we live in a grief illiterate society where people really don't embrace talking about grief. Reimagine has been very intentional about cultivating spaces where we can come together and we can lament and we can mourn and we can really express ourselves when it comes to talking about our grief. And I think beyond this platform today, one thing that I would mention is the importance of finding those safe spaces and pockets of people that we know that we can truly just simply be. We don't have to put on airs. We're not out to win an Oscar. We're not here to pretend that if I feel like crying and if I show up on your doorstep crying, that you just open up the door and give me a hug, right? That you don't have to say anything. And I say that often because oftentimes people try to come up with these neat euphemisms or quick, cute sayings to say, oh, it's okay. Time will heal, as Julie mentioned earlier, time will heal all wounds. But those things never will really ever solve the void that is present there once the person has departed, right? So more so than just filling the void with, in my humble opinion, unfortunately, useless words in this context. I always like to present people the opportunity to just sit in silence and just be with them in community, right? Oftentimes, silence is the biggest gift that we can offer to someone who's walking through grief, even as they may embrace you and their people are weeping or they're crying or they're left without words, right? Some of the best ways that I've been able to cope with my loss has been when a friend has come over and has simply said nothing and just held my hand. When a friend has come over and just given me the space and time to just simply be. And so I think at times we can think about perhaps how we might create that space for ourselves. And if you find solace perhaps in sharing memories of your loved one, feeling free to find those people and spaces where you feel safe enough to share those memories can also perhaps be helpful or beneficial in this context as well.
Dr. Chinasa and Dr. Julie, let me know when you want me to stop the share. Happy to
Okay.
keep it up.
Okay. Maybe we can take it
Yeah.
down for now. Um, and I would love to add, and I see that Veronica has put in there using ritual, religious ritual, foundation ritual helps me. I
Mhm.
love this because this is the perfect segue into what we have next is that I would love to open up the chat box for opportunity for people to share. And I say this, this is a quick grief tip is sometimes when we are helping folks is to say for me. Those two words can be very, very helpful because this is what works for me. And I can tell you what works for me. It may not work for you, but let's keep an open mind to this, and this can hopefully help other people that are here today. I would love for you to share what has worked for you, or maybe what are some things that you're thinking about that as we're reimagining what these year of first will be like, we've expressed what we're kind of thinking about, but now what are some of the things that we're thinking about that can help, or that can help support us, or maybe help support others? And I know we've started off with the silence, which is great, right? Sometimes we listen to respond rather than to listen to truly be present with that person, and give them that space to feel and to express. So go ahead and start putting in the chat. What are some things that you feel like have worked for you, that you have tried, or that you're looking to try here in the future to help you navigate these first. Oh, love that, Shweta. Hopefully I'm pronouncing names correctly. There's two participating and showing up. Sometimes just simply showing up on something like this can be very helpful. So thank you for showing up today. And keep up with the chat here. Collaborating with my siblings, my loved ones, partner too. Oh, music. Music is healing. We could probably do a whole session on music. Thank you. Mm. Body work, dancing. I was just thinking about dancing today. I'm a former professional athlete, so movement for me is very, very helpful, is to move the grief around our body. And maybe some of you, as you're experiencing these first, maybe you feel it in your body. And that's also an indicator that we can listen to when our grief is trying to speak to us, or when our grief is trying to get our attention, and how we can pay attention to that. Music as well. Love it. Good. Thank you. Somatic therapy. And if there are any of these things that maybe you're like, huh, like I don't know what that is, like please Google it, look for more information on it, get curious about your grief. I think for me, I never thought that this is what I would be doing and that I would be walking people through. And Dr. Elue, I see you nodding your head there, but that's what happened for me, is I got very, very curious. And for me, it was educating myself so that I could help educate others and be in spaces with others, to continue to learn. And I'm still learning so many things every day, and learning from you all here too. So thank you.
I love that. Gardening, something that connects you with the deceased, doing an activity that connects you with your deceased one. Yeah.
Okay, and I always love to add this as a tip, and I might have said it earlier, is as we're navigating these first, whether it's your first year, whether it's your 10th year and you're experiencing different firsts, is to allow yourself to be open to trying new things. It's almost like being a detective on what will help us, because sometimes we get so stuck in the mainstream of, well, go get a therapist, which I also recommend, try it. But maybe that type of therapy doesn't work for you. Maybe it's something else, right? Or maybe it is art and you've never picked up a paintbrush in your life, but for some reason you connect with this method, or like the gardening that was put in there. But there are so many things out there in this world that sometimes that's where our grief can lead us to these awesome discoveries that we never could have imagined, or that we never could have thought we would have connected with before. And of course, just like Dr. Ellie was saying, it's this new iteration, how we become new, and what does that newness look like? And to say, even, and having that growth mindset of saying, okay, it's a no right now, but maybe down the line, it'll be a yes, or I'll be open to it later. Because sometimes, depending where you are in your grief experience, you just may not be ready yet. And that's okay. That's okay. That maybe it'll be something different and it'll keep evolving. I didn't know if you wanted to add anything else here, Dr. Elue.
I'll add more when we get to sharing some more tips on the slide.
Okay, perfect. Well, we can do that now. I'm going to go ahead, and as we've been giving our tips, and it looks like people are coming up with so many other great tips here, as well. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now. And so these are just a few that we put together. And as you can see, there's so many more in the chat box that you've been illuminating. So with these quick tips, exactly what you're seeing here, right? Maybe even today you've done it. Maybe you've screenshot the chat box, whatever it might be. Write it down, save it, keep a journal, save it in your notes on your phone if you have that app. If you have or if you just have a journal and you're old school and you just want to just put it on a post-it, but then come back and revisit these ideas. Have it in a space. I think even on, let's say, even on Instagram, when I look on social media, there's a save option where you can make folders in your Instagram. And sometimes if I see certain things that I want to try, I'll save it in a folder because I'll be like, that looks interesting. Maybe I'll try that like next month, or I'll look more into this. Save the ideas, ask people for ideas. And if they give it to you and you just don't want to hear them, like, just be like, I'm just not ready for that yet. Come
Yeah.
back to me again in a few months, right? So even if it's your fifth year, this is the first time you're experiencing what it's like to be your fifth year in grief. So
Yeah.
these different, so maybe 5 years later, that yoga class will be for you now, and to be able to try that. And then do you want to go to the next one there, or you can pick
Yeah.
whichever one you want to talk about?
Absolutely. The one that I really wanted to hit home with was actually the second one, create an exit strategy. And what we were referring to by this is that, there are opportunities where you might be at an event and you have an innate trigger. I'll give you a quick example. When my mom was turning 50, we were not we wanted to celebrate her. My husband and I had just recently gotten married, and we didn't have any money to like really do a big celebration for her 50th birthday. She had wanted to at least do a trip or have some friends come over. And my siblings and I were like, we got you at 60, mommy. Well, we never got to 60. And so when my mom passed away at 54, it didn't dawn on me at that moment that all of the different plans that we had for her in the coming years would never come to fruition until I began to physically experience it. And I'll give you a quick example. I was at a friend's dad's party. One of my friends, he's like a second father to me. He had a 60th birthday. So I'm excited to go celebrate him because we have all of these great memories growing up. But I literally walk into the birthday celebration and I collapsed. Like I was in a puddle of tears. And it slapped me in that moment that I would never get to throw my mom a celebration at her 60th. And I literally could not stay at the event. I tried my best. I kept trying to exit and re-enter. And I recognized in that moment that for me, it was a milestone moment for me to recognize that this is an innate trigger because it's something that you wanted to do to honor your mom, and you will no longer have that opportunity. And so there are often times where you can anticipate that something might be triggering for, some of my siblings that were getting married at the time. They knew they would never have that mother-son dance, that kind of a thing, right? But there are other opportunities where you may not have thought it would be a trigger, but perhaps in this particular moment in time, there is a space for you to begin and think about what other firsts might be coming up where I haven't really thought how this might impact me, but when you get there, it perhaps could be a trigger. And if it is a trigger for you, how might you exit? For me, I had to just, let my friend know I loved you. I gave her dad a hug, and I left and I went home and I wept. And I needed to weep because I had to honor the fact that I love this woman so much and I would not be able to celebrate her, right? So having an exit strategy can be beneficial and useful for events in the case that something similar perhaps may happen to you.
Thank you for that story. That actually reminded um, me about, as I was navigating and still am, my infertility journey, is there were baby showers that were happening. And there was a virtual baby shower for my sister-in-law. And so one, even navigating, hearing the news, having that celebration, I kind of felt like I questioned myself, how will I feel? Because I'm still very happy. I'm still very happy for her. However, I also didn't want to impact her celebration in a negative way, or what could have come off as a negative way. And so it was something that I had a plan in place where I said, let me see how I feel on that day. if I could even be on camera, or if I could feel like I could say something. And on that day, I couldn't. So I just simply had to explain that to her and say, hey, I'll say hi. But after that, I'm going to have to remove myself, and that I am very happy for you. It's just right now, this is very challenging for me, and explaining that it's simply my grief coming through. So being able to have that, and then also, as I know Dr. Elue and I do work in the corporate spaces and helping organizations with employees returning back to work. And I think going back to work, that can be very hard as well. And being able to have an exit strategy when you go back to work, or having things set in place. I've dubbed it kind of as like a grief ally that you can have at work, that maybe you can tell somebody your story, you can tell somebody what happened, so they can be the one that communicates that to everybody else. Because what can happen is everybody at work means well, but you will have to repeat your story over and over again. So having an exit strategy in that way, but then also knowing, hey, there's a break room that I know nobody goes into. And if I know I'm going to have a moment, that's my room that I'm going to go to. Or if this happens, I'm going to have to tell my coworkers, I'm just going to take myself off Zoom. I can't have my camera on. So being able to have different plans as well can be very helpful.
Yeah. In that same vein, I love this point here around allowing yourself to feel because, and from a professional standpoint, at times when you have to go back to work, right, for a variety of different reasons, those emotions and this very much so grief experience that we're having doesn't go away. I think about the first time I had to go back to work and that grief math that you mentioned, I kept doing it in my head. I was like, this time last year, mom was here. This
Mhm.
time last semester, she was around, right? And I remember getting back to work and walking into the building and just immediately overcome by grief, knowing that on my way home, driving in this crazy traffic in Atlanta, where I would call my mom to just give her the tea of the day, I would no longer have that opportunity just to debrief with her, to crack a joke or two. And so I remember having to allow my colleagues who saw me and were ready to embrace me and welcome me back to work with open arms. I had to let them know, hey, I am really struggling right now. And I'm glad to be back, but I need a lot of grace in this season. And I think sometimes, particularly, and I'll mention here for BIPOC folks, a lot of times going back to work, you may not feel safe to share because sometimes our spaces are not safe, right? And I think about that in light of what we've seen happening across the country in a variety of different industries. I'm in higher ed and I work in a variety of corporate settings, but I've seen and we've all bore witness to how at times we desire to go back into work and come in with our authentic selves, but our authentic selves may not be welcomed in that space, or people are not ready to receive us in that capacity, right? And so I recognize that that requires a level of courageousness to even be willing to engage and see what that might look like for yourself, right? Especially if there's a lack of psychological safety or just general safety for your well-being. You may not feel like it's the greatest place for you to really emote or share how you feel because people may capitalize on that for a variety of different reasons. So I want to acknowledge that, particularly as this space is centering the experiences of BIPOC folks to let us know, like, yo, every space is not a safe space, and we know that, right? But I think within reason, thinking about how you allow yourself to feel or asking for the deadline is warranted when we're grieving, right? We are not these supernatural, superhuman creatures. We deserve care, we deserve love, we deserve rest. And sometimes you just got to take it for yourself. So as you are feeling these emotions, take what you need
Mhm.
and go into that space and give yourself the abundant grace that you need so that you can work through your grief, but then also be able to show up in ways that make sense for you, right? Not for anybody else, not for to hit those metrics, but in ways that make sense for you and the ways that you desire to return back to work.
Thank you, because I know all of us here, there has been a work dynamic that, whether it's our own personal work that we're going to, that we want to return to, or if it's a workspace that we're dedicated to. Um, let's see. So I want to. Oh, I'm looking at the chat box here. Yes. Okay, good. Yeah, continue to write in there as well. The next one that I want to call attention to is the send an email or text to your friends. And we kind of touched on that. This can be something as simple, and I saw this somewhere where somebody did that. They sent an email, they drafted an email and and a text message, whether it was in the workspace or to their friends. But I'll address the friends and the community piece is to let them know to keep inviting you, to say, because sometimes people on the other end, they don't know how to support you. And another thing that was brought up too, even with the inclusion mindset, is I was talking to Brianna Simmons, who's the founder of Unearthing Tradition, and she was talking about how sometimes the way that our society is set up, people may not be able to give you the help that you would like to receive, even though they're well intentioned, because they may not and this is around capitalism, right? That they may not be financially able to. That like maybe, and I was like, gosh, I've never heard of it that way. That is such a good point. That maybe they want to buy you groceries. Maybe they want to give you a day off, but they have kids to take care of themselves. That these are some things that may hold back people from actually helping you in the way that they want to. So even encouraging them in subtle ways to say, hey, all you have to do is keep checking in on me. That's all I want you to do is keep checking in on me, keep inviting me to places. I might say no for a very, very long time, but I'm ready to get that yes. And so keep inviting me. So even sending them that can send a signal and be a good communication for people to help support you, and that you can get the support that you need and they can understand, because sometimes we do need that solitude, and that's okay too. And it's very much needed. But when we get through that place, when we start to see the light there, and want to crack that door open, we want to have those invitations still waiting for us.
I love that so much, Dr. Shaw. And as you were talking about the importance of sending that email or text, I was thinking about particularly how for oftentimes for BIPOC folks who are used to always giving all the time, right? And
Mhm.
being the caretaker, being the one that people always go to, sometimes it's hard to receive, right? And so to send that email or text requires us recognizing and honoring this moment in time that it's okay. It's okay to ask for help. It's okay to lean into that, knowing that it's an opportunity where people desperately want to show that they care and
Mhm.
that they love you and that they support you, and that it's okay to accept it and receive it openly without thinking you have to do or earn your way back in anything in return, right? That it's okay to receive. And so I just wanted to highlight that here because I know that as you mentioned, and I was like, yes, send the email, send the text, and don't worry about how to repay the people back. It's okay. It's okay.
Yes, thank you for saying that, because we live in such a transactional world where people feel, if I give you something, then oh gosh, what do I have to give back to this person? And I learned that a few years back about this transaction, and how can you just give without needing to have this exchange, you know? And so it's a beautiful thing when you can start to embody that, and other people catch on to that, that there's no expectations. There's absolutely no expectations, and it could free us of a lot of our our worries and stress or anxiety that we may feel. So I love that. Thank you. Let's see. The next one is plan a trip or a block of time. This is something for me that I have chosen to do. My sister's birthday and death day are a week apart. And so it's coming up for me. This is a grief season for me, that her birthday is February 5th. The following week, exactly a week later, is her death anniversary. And so what I've chosen to do is every year I've said, okay, I'm going to go on a solo trip by myself. So whether it is to a far off destination, or if it's just local here in the Los Angeles area, that I just, even if it's just for the day, to be by myself, because I felt like my sister and I were just getting to a place where we could take road trips or do these different experiences. So now it's a way that I can continue to travel with her, and have conversations with her. And that's where I practice having these conversations with her. And it's been helpful. But I was reminded by my therapist that, because I was feeling the pressure going to into year 4, that I was just like, what am I going to do? I thought that, and especially with it being her 44th, or my 44th birthday, and also her same age, when she died, is I was putting a lot of pressure on myself that this had to be something big, that it had to be something momentous, and that I had to like go. I had these visions of I'm gonna get a tattoo and I don't have any, right? Like to go do something to commemorate this. But my therapist reminded me, because I was feeling the pressure of every single year I'm gonna have to do this, that sometimes you don't. That even if you have something planned that you may do traditionally, you do not have to feel the pressure of always having to do it. That it's this impermanence, which death will teach us the biggest lesson of impermanence. Things can change. You can change. You will change. And so even if you had a plan set in mind or you had a celebration set in mind, that can change. And to allow yourself to give you again that grace we've been talking about, to allow that to happen. And then the block of time is another technique and tip is, yes, you can schedule your grief. Okay. So for those of us, like myself, who live a very busy life, is that you can block off on your calendar. This is when I will grieve. This is when I will, if I need to lay on the floor and eat a bucket of ice cream, this is when I will do it. To allow yourself that time to do this. So all of this. Oh, I think you put this. Oh yeah, there is a big calendar that I have on my wall right now where I plan things out and I can see it all laid out visually. So grief and everything and life in between, that I can do. So
Yeah.
block that time off, and schedule it for yourself, as well.
And as you were talking, I wanted to draw attention to that comment someone mentioned. Can someone say avoiding grief is valid too? And I think it is, right? Like,
Mm,
again, in part of our grief journey, you determine how and when you want to grieve, right? And what that may look like for you, acknowledging what Dr. Shaw said earlier, as long as you're not hurting yourself or anyone else, determine how that process might look like for you, right? I wanted to hit home really quickly when you mentioned the block of time. One thing that was very instrumental for me and and something I've continued on is just I don't go to work on the days of the death anniversary
mm,
or my mother's birthday. I know that if I were to show up, that I would be no good. So I literally just I give myself grace the days leading up and after. I don't schedule too many meetings, and then the days of those particular anniversaries, I'm offline. I'm offline. I'm going out for a walk. I'm in nature. If I can get away for a trip at times, I'll try and take one. But I recognizing in this context as well that that may, vary from person to person. But um, give yourself the space because you don't know how it's going to hit. And that year first, um, the anniversaries were very, very hard. There was not an anniversary that hit that I did not cry, that I did not need time to process. And again, continue to reimagine this deep, deep void that was there and how I would continue to honor her. So I think that takes us over to our next point in terms of honoring your loved one, right? Because in blocking off that time, you have to think about perhaps what makes sense for you, right? If the relationship was one that was positive and one that deeply impacted who you are from your day-to-day life, then it may look different, right? For us, I mentioned earlier in my story that I wasn't able to master my mom's dressing recipe over the holidays, right? But my sister and I promised ourselves that we would practice before it got to the holidays, and so sometimes we would do Sunday night dinners and we would experiment with the recipe. Is this the right amount of celery or did you add this seasoning? And it got to a point we mastered it and we wrote the recipe down. And now we can rinse and repeat going forward. And when we serve that dish during the holidays, that's paying homage to my mom, right? We know that, again, she was a master chef. And so we figured out a way to bring her into our celebrations as a family and continue to keep her memory alive. And so I just wanted to toss that out there that you give yourself grace as you're thinking about what honoring might be. And if the relationship wasn't as positive, it was a negative one, but it's still impacting you deeply because perhaps they weren't who you needed them to be while they were alive. You think about the complexity of that and how perhaps you still might honor yourself and where you are in your moment in grief and recognizing that grief is messy and it's not perfect. And if the relationship was not what it needed to be, you might feel sadness, but you also might be enraged at the same time. And that's valid and it's okay. And there's nothing wrong with you. And so I just want to honor that in this moment that grief is complex and
mhm.
that
Great
it
point.
warrants us thinking through how perhaps that honoring, whether good or bad, might exist as we move forward.
Yes, I was snapping for you if you didn't see. Um, because there's so much. Because even I'll add one more to that with the complication is there can also be relief. There can also be relief. And sometimes that's very hard for people to say, and to put out there because we might feel guilty or we might feel shame. And I think I've heard shame needs secrecy to survive. And so it's like when we cannot share and get that out there, it's gonna bubble up inside us somehow. But I just want to throw that out there for people too, especially some folks that maybe were in the role of caregiver, because that is a lot of time, and it's very hard and challenging. And I had those moments with my sister, right? And so there can be that relief there. So I wanted to include that in here as well. And thank you to everybody who's been very inclusive of all these different experiences and how messy grief is, because it can be. I also wanted to acknowledge there was a comment about during COVID and beyond, the frequency of deaths have been unending. Can you speak to this unusual time we're in? I'll just say something real briefly. Dr. Elue, you can definitely chime in. But yes, like it is a very unusual and hectic time we are sitting in right now in this moment, and what we're experiencing not only with COVID, but also what's happening within our world, and everything that's been going on in the world with all the horrible deaths that are taking place. And so, even being able to hold space for that, I just want to acknowledge the collective grief in that. And maybe Dr. Elway touched on that a little bit earlier, is understanding we may not know people that are even hurting in other regions of this world, but when we see these images and when we maybe have some type of connection, that we're collectively grieving. And I think that can also be confusing, but also compound our own grief and make it even more complex, and how that intersects with how we're experiencing it, and also how we are empathizing for the people that are experiencing it as well. So
And just Dr. Shaw, thank you so much for that, because honestly, in working with others, there's this collective sense of sadness, deeply felt sadness that exists in this moment of time, right? And it's been an onslaught on any given day. It's breaking news after breaking news after breaking news. And imagine, and as we've all been living through this particular moment in time, never having any reprieve. And then later that on top of walking through a very debilitating loss in a variety of different ways. It's compounded, right? And so I think in this particular moment, as we're talking about perhaps some strategies, these may be some things that we can leverage to even help us process and create space to embrace those emotions. But then, as Dr. Shaw mentioned, there's just a complexity that like we've never seen exist. It's so peculiar, and untenable in a lot of ways, because it's never ending. It has not ended in a very, very long time. So I've never seen anything like this, but as we've been walking through and processing all of the grief, it's compounded, as Dr. Shaw mentioned.
I'll add one more thing there. um, and it'll be biological again, like with our brain and how our brain works, is the amygdala in your brain is the center of your brain that registers fear. It also is the part of your brain that tells you, maybe you've heard of this, is to whether you want to fight, whether you want to have experienced flight, or you want to freeze. And these are the reactions that happen not only with grief, but when we're talking about all this breaking news that we're seeing as well. And maybe our initial reaction, and I want to validate some people here, this was something when I heard really validated my reaction, is understanding that oftentimes we forget about the freeze part. We often only think about fight or flight, but freeze is also a reaction. And it is a very valid reaction, that sometimes when we might think, I want to say something, I want to speak out, I want to take action, but we feel like we can't. And we then judge ourselves because of this. But I want you to know that freezing is also an action. And so I just want to leave that there because I know it was very helpful for me. Oh, good one. We're having Tanya put in there to fund people pleasing. Yes, okay. We don't want to go down go down that rabbit hole. So thank you. And I know we're getting close to time here and want to respect your time as well. So
If
go
I
ahead, Dr.
could,
Mhm.
yeah, if I could, we wanted to give you all an opportunity to do some resource sharing. As Dr. Sean, I mentioned, we're here today to really share our insights and how we've been able to conceptualize navigating our own year first, and even in some of the work that we've done with our clients, how we've been able to help them think about and reimagine what that looks like for them. So I'm going to drop in the chat really quickly another Padlet link that takes you to another palette where you can share perhaps some resources that you might leverage in thinking about or constructing your year first. Dr. Shaw mentioned, I saw Andy, you mentioned in the chat that the calendar that may be helpful for you to think about or add that on as you're thinking about planning for your own upcoming year. But we want to give you the opportunity to do that. In addition, the Padlet link is live, so I believe you can download the link and save it for your own use going forward. So we wanted to make it an opportunity for you to share resources and then also hold on to it so that you can experiment over time. Recognizing that honestly, something might work this, next month for you, but a couple of months later, it may no longer be valid or useful for you in that context. So giving yourself the space and grace you need to experiment and embrace an exploratory nature with the different resources might be beneficial as well.
Well, Dr. Elue, Dr. Shaw, you two are fantastic. You really are the dynamic duo. Can we show some love to these folks? I think I'm the only one whose video's on, but I'm showing the love. Maybe the chat too, show some love. Um, this was wonderful. I didn't mention this earlier, but we will send out a recording of this gathering, so you have it. I'll also try to include this Padlet link as part of that follow-up. I can already see some of you are already populating that, so thank you for that. I put some links in the chat just to learn more about Dr. Shaw and Dr. Elue. Stay in touch with them. Also, there's a link in there to share with you a bit about how you can host your own events on Reimagine's event platform. So I encourage you to check that out. And I want to thank those of you who already made a donation to Reimagine when you registered for this event. It's not required at all, but it's much appreciated. I hope to see you all at other events. I hope we can bring back Dr. Shaw and Dr. Elue for more and stay in touch, okay? Much love to everybody.
And thank you so much. I
Thank you.
appreciate everyone here. And I think our contact information's on the screen too. So use that as a resource as well.